The dust swirled across the parched road as Abigail Mercer squinted against the harsh summer sun, her knuckles white as she gripped the hands of her two small children. Her once fine dress was travel-worn, her boots scuffed beyond repair, but her spine remained straight as a rifle barrel as she approached the sprawling ranch that represented her last hope in the vast Wyoming Territory of 1875. "Mama, I'm thirsty," whispered 5-year-old Emma, her golden curls damp with sweat beneath her bonnet. "Just a little further, darling," Abigail promised, though her own throat felt like sandpaper. 7-year-old Thomas trudged silently beside her, his small face solemn beyond his years. The children had grown too accustomed to disappointment these past months since their father's death. The Double P Ranch spread before them like a kingdom, the main house rising proudly from the prairie, cattle dotting the distant hills. The advertisement in the Cheyenne newspaper had been clear. Ranch hands needed, room and board provided. It hadn't specified women, but Abigail had run out of options and train fare alike. As they approached the ranch house, a tall figure emerged from the barn, moving with the easy, bow-legged gait of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. He paused when he spotted them, pushing his hat back to reveal a sun-weathered face framed by dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "You folks lost." His voice carried across the yard, not unkind but wary. Abigail squared her shoulders. "No, sir. I've come about the position." The man's eyebrows rose as he closed the distance between them. Up close, his eyes were a startling blue against his tan skin. "Position." "Ranch hand. I saw your advertisement in Cheyenne." A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed his face. "Madam, we're looking for cowboys." "I can work," she insisted, lifting her chin. "I can cook, clean, mend, garden. I can milk cows and tend chickens. I've helped birth calves and broken horses." His gaze traveled from her determined face to the children standing quietly beside her, then back again. "You come all this way for work?" "Yes, sir. Name's Preston Blackwood. I own this spread." He knelt down to the children's level. "And who might you two be?" Thomas stepped protectively in front of his sister. "I'm Thomas Mercer. This is Emma. Our mama is Mrs. Abigail Mercer." Preston Blackwood's mouth corked up at the boy's formality. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Mercer." He stood, meeting Abigail's eyes. "Mrs. Mercer, I don't typically hire women for ranch work." Abigail felt her heart sink, but she refused to let her desperation show. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm not asking for charity. I'll earn my keep and then some." "And the children? They're hard workers too, for their age." Her voice nearly broke, but she steeled herself. "Thomas can help with chores, and Emma is clever with her hands." Preston Blackwood studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "I'll give you more than wages, Mrs. Mercer." Abigail stiffened. "I'm not looking for a proper position," he continued smoothly. "My housekeeper left last month to marry. Place needs a woman's touch, and the men need decent cooking. You'd have your own quarters in the house with your children, not the bunkhouse." The relief nearly buckled her knees. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. We won't disappoint you." "Preston," he corrected. "Welcome to the Double P." He extended a calloused hand, and when Abigail took it, she felt an unexpected warmth spread through her palm and up her arm. "Water for your children first," Preston said, noticing Emma's flushed face. "Then we'll get you settled." As they walked toward the house, Abigail felt the weight of countless miles and sleepless nights pressing down on her. But for the first time since burying her husband, she allowed herself to breathe just a little deeper. The main house of the Double P Ranch was larger than it appeared from a distance. Built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides, It spoke of prosperity hard-won from the Wyoming soil. Inside, Abigail was surprised by the spaciousness, high ceilings, wide plank floors covered with colorful rugs, and solid furniture that had weathered the years with dignity. "Kitchen's through there," Preston said, pointing. "Your quarters will be down that hall, 3 rooms. Used to be for the housekeeper and her family." 3 rooms. Abigail couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. They'd been sharing single rooms in boarding houses for months. Preston nodded. "Bedroom for you, 1 for the children, and a sitting room. Bathrooms shared with the main house, but you'll have privacy." Emma tugged at Abigail's skirt. "Mama, look!" She pointed to a bookshelf filled with volumes. "Mr. Blackwood has lots of books, doesn't he?" Abigail smiled down at her daughter. "Preston," he corrected again. "And those were my mother's. She was a schoolteacher before she married my father." He hesitated, then added, "You're welcome to them, all of you." Thomas had remained silent, studying the room with the careful observation of a child who had learned to be wary of new situations. "Do you have horses, sir?" he finally asked. Preston's face softened. 27 saddle horses, 8 draft horses, and more cattle than you can count, son. You like horses?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "Well, we might have to find you a gentle one to learn on once you're settled." The boy's eyes widened, but he maintained his composure. "Thank you, sir. Let me show you to your quarters. Then I'll introduce you to the cook. He's been managing since Mrs. Hollister left, but the men are about ready to revolt over his biscuits." Abigail followed Preston down the hallway, children in tow. The rooms were simply furnished but clean, with windows that looked out over the pastures. A double bed with a patchwork quilt dominated the main bedroom, while the children's room held 2 narrow beds and a small chest of drawers. "It's not fancy," Preston said, watching her face. "It's perfect," Abigail whispered, overwhelmed by the sudden turn in their fortunes. "I'll have one of the boys bring in your things." "We have only what we carried," Abigail admitted, gesturing to the small bundle she'd set down. "The rest was sold to pay debts." Something flashed in Preston's eyes, anger, perhaps, though not directed at her. "There's a mercantile in town. We'll ride in tomorrow. Get what you need." "Mr. Blackwood, Preston, I can't accept. It's an advance on your wages," he said firmly. "Can't have my housekeeper and her children without proper necessities." Before she could protest further, a booming voice echoed from the front of the house. "Boss, got them strays rounded up from the north pasture." "That'll be Miguel," Preston explained. "My foreman. Come meet the crew." The crew turned out to be 7 men of varying ages and backgrounds who eyed Abigail and her children with undisguised curiosity. Miguel Sanchez, the foreman, was a barrel-chested Mexican with a magnificent mustache and a ready smile. The others ranged from grizzled veterans like Hank and Jasper, who'd been with the ranch since Preston's father's time, to young Charlie, barely 18 and still sporting more freckles than whiskers. "Mrs. Mercer will be taking over as housekeeper," Preston announced. "And her children, Thomas and Emma, will be joining us too." "Thank the Lord!" exclaimed Jasper, removing his hat. "Begging your pardon, madam, but if I had to eat one more of Miguel's attempts at bread, I might have just started grazing with the cattle." The men laughed, including Miguel, who shrugged good-naturedly. "My talents are with horses, not flour. Mrs. Mercer and her children have had a long journey," Preston continued. "They'll start tomorrow. For tonight, Miguel, would you have Charlie bring in water for baths? And Hank, see if there's any of that venison stew left." As the men dispersed to their tasks, Preston turned to Abigail. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow will be soon enough to start work." Alone in their quarters that evening, with both children bathed and tucked into real beds for the first time in months, Abigail finally allowed herself a moment of weakness. Silent tears tracked down her cheeks as she unpinned her hair, the enormity of their journey and this unexpected sanctuary overwhelming her. "Mama!" Thomas stood in the doorway, his small face solemn in the lamplight. Abigail quickly wiped her tears. "What is it, darling? Can't sleep?" He shook his head. "Is this our home now?" The question pierced her heart. Since losing their farm in Kansas after John's death, home had been a series of temporary lodgings, each less welcoming than the last as their money dwindled. "For now," she answered carefully. "As long as I work hard for Mr. Blackwood." Thomas considered this. "I like him. He doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby." "No, he doesn't," Abigail agreed, surprised by her son's observation. "Papa would have liked him too," Thomas added confidently. Abigail felt her throat tighten. "Come here." She opened her arms and Thomas climbed into her lap, though he was getting almost too big for it. "I think you're right. Now back to bed with you." After Thomas returned to his room, Abigail stood at the window, looking out at the vast Wyoming night. Stars blazed in a velvet sky, more than she'd ever seen back east. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, answered by another. The lonesome sound matched the hollow place in her heart, but tonight, for the first time in a long while, that hollow was edged with something that felt dangerously like hope. Morning came early on the Double P Ranch. Abigail woke before dawn, dressed quickly in her worn calico dress, and twisted her dark hair into a practical knot. She found the kitchen already occupied by a sleepy-looking Charlie, struggling to light the cook stove. "Let me," she offered, taking the matches from his grateful hands. "Thank you, madam. Boss said to help you get oriented. But truth is, none of us men know much about keeping a proper kitchen." Abigail smiled. "Why don't you show me the pantry and storeroom? Then you can tell me what time the men expect breakfast." By the time the first cowboys straggled in, rubbing sleep from their eyes, Abigail had hot coffee brewing, sourdough biscuits baking, and a pan of bacon sizzling. Emma sat at the big kitchen table, carefully folding napkins, while Thomas had appointed himself official door opener, standing proudly as the men filed in. Preston entered last, his hair damp from washing, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene with an expression Abigail couldn't quite read. "Something smells like heaven," he said finally. "Just bacon and biscuits," Abigail replied, feeling unaccountably flustered under his steady gaze. "And coffee. After months of Miguel's cooking, that qualifies as heaven." He took a seat at the head of the table, nodding approval as Emma shyly placed a napkin beside his plate. "Thank you, Miss Emma." The little girl beamed at the formal address. Abigail served the food, trying not to notice how the men's eyes followed her movements or how Preston seemed to watch her with particular intensity. "Mrs. Mercer," he said as the meal wound down, "I thought we'd ride into town today as discussed. The men can manage without us. But I haven't finished unpacking or taking inventory of the kitchen supplies," Abigail protested. "That can wait. You and the children need proper clothes and necessities." His tone brooked no argument. An hour later, Abigail found herself seated beside Preston in a wagon, children squeezed between them, heading toward the town of Pine Ridge. The journey took nearly 2 hours, giving Abigail time to appreciate the vastness of the Double P lands. Cattle grazed on rolling hills, cottonwoods lined creek beds, and distant mountains loomed blue against the horizon. "It's beautiful country," she said, breaking a comfortable silence. Preston nodded. "My father saw it first in '49, on his way to California for gold. Never made it there. Said this land spoke to him, told him to stay." "You were born here?" "Born in this wagon, actually," he said with a slight smile. "My mother couldn't make it to town in time." Emma, who had been listening, looked up with wide eyes. In a wagon? Like being born in a house that moves. Preston laughed, a rich sound that Abigail realized she hadn't heard before. That's right, Miss Emma. A moving house. The town of Pine Ridge consisted of one main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, a bank, a hotel with attached saloon, a blacksmith, and a few other establishments. Women in calico dresses and men in dusty work clothes moved about their business, pausing to nod respectfully to Preston as he helped Abigail and the children down from the wagon. Mr. Blackwood, the general store owner, greeted them effusively. What brings you to town today, Mrs. Mercer? Here is my new housekeeper, Preston explained. She and her children need outfitting. Mr. Jenkins, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, assessed Abigail with open curiosity. Pleased to meet you, madam. Any friend of Mr. Blackwood's is welcome here. Preston guided Abigail through the store, insisting on not just necessities but small luxuries. She would never have selected for herself a bolt of fine blue cotton to match her eyes, a silver hairbrush for Emma, a pocket knife for Thomas. When she protested the mounting cost, he waved her concerns away. The double P can afford it, he said quietly, and you'll earn every penny. While Mr. Jenkins wrapped their purchases, Preston excused himself to visit the bank. Left alone with the storekeeper, Abigail became aware of his speculative gaze. Mr. Blackwood's never brought a housekeeper to town before, he remarked casually. I'm sure he's just being kind to the children, Abigail replied, keeping her voice neutral. Oh, he's a kind man, sure enough. Fairest rancher in the territory. But not one for special attention, generally speaking. Mr. Jenkins handed her a peppermint stick. For the little girl. On the house. Thank you, Abigail said, wondering at his implied meaning. Preston returned as they were loading the purchases into the wagon. One more stop, he announced. The dressmakers. Mrs. Lewis can take measurements today and have some things ready when we return next week. Mr. Blackwood, really, this is too much, Preston, he corrected for what seemed the dozenth time. And it's not too much. A housekeeper at the Double P has a certain position to maintain. Before she could argue further, he was helping her back into the wagon, his hand strong and warm against hers. The brief contact sent an unexpected tingle up her arm that she firmly attributed to the spring breeze. Mrs. Lewis, the dressmaker, was a tiny woman with nimble fingers and a no-nonsense manner. She'd get over Abigail's worn dress, took measurements with businesslike efficiency, and promised 2 everyday dresses and 1, suitable for church and social occasions, by the following week. And for the children, too, Preston insisted, ignoring Abigail's protests. They ate lunch at the hotel, a treat that had Thomas and Emma on their best behavior, eyes wide at the relative luxury. Preston spoke easily with the children, drawing Thomas out about his interest in horses and listening solemnly to Emma's description of her favorite doll, left behind in Kansas. Perhaps we can find you a new one, he suggested, his eyes meeting Abigail's over Emma's head. You're spoiling them, Abigail said softly when the children were distracted by dessert. They've had hard times, Preston replied. A little spoiling won't hurt. How do you know we've had hard times? His blue eyes held hers. It's in your eyes, Mrs. Mercer, and in the way you hold yourself, like you're expecting the next blow. Abigail looked away, uncomfortable with his perception. My husband died 14 months ago. Typhoid. The farm was mortgaged, and the bank took everything. Preston was silent for a moment. I lost my wife 6 years ago. Childbirth. The baby too. I'm sorry, Abigail whispered, understanding now the shadows she sometimes glimpsed behind his steady gaze. Life goes on, he said simply. We do what we must. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both children dozing against Abigail as the wagon swayed along the rutted road. Preston handled the reins with easy competence, occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or sharing stories of the ranch's early days. My father built the house himself, with help from 2 Shoshone men who'd worked with him since he arrived. Took nearly 2 years. It's a beautiful home, Abigail said. Your mother must have been pleased. She was a Boston girl, used to city comforts, but she loved my father enough to follow him west. He glanced at her. Women are stronger than men in many ways. Not stronger, just different strengths, perhaps. Preston nodded thoughtfully. Well said, Mrs. Mercer. Abigail, she corrected, surprising herself. If I'm to call you Preston. His slow smile made something flutter in her chest. Abigail it is, then. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Abigail established routines and familiarized herself with the workings of the ranch house. She rose before dawn to start breakfast, spent mornings cleaning and organizing, afternoons cooking and baking, and evenings mending and planning the next day's meals. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time in over a year, she felt useful, needed. Thomas attached himself to Hank, the oldest ranch hand, following the weathered cowboy around like a shadow whenever his mother allowed. Emma, meanwhile, appointed herself Preston's special helper, carrying messages and fetching his hat with solemn importance. Preston himself was often gone from sunrise to sunset, returning with the dust of the range on his clothes and weariness etched in the lines around his eyes. Yet he always had a kind word for the children and unfailing courtesy for Abigail. On Sunday morning, Abigail dressed the children in their best remaining clothes from Kansas, though these were threadbare now, and prepared to walk the 3 miles to the small church in Pine Ridge. You're planning to walk? Preston appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed in a clean black suit that transformed him from rancher to gentleman. Yes, we always attend services, Abigail explained. The exercise will do us good. Preston shook his head. I'll hitch up the buggy. We'll all go together. Oh, I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition. I attend most Sundays myself. His eyes crinkled at the corners. Though I admit I've been remiss lately without a woman to make sure my collar is straight. The church was a simple white clapboard building with a modest steeple. Inside, wooden pews faced a plain pulpit, with sunlight streaming through clear glass windows. The congregation consisted of ranch families, townspeople, and a few prospectors from the hills. Abigail was acutely aware of the curious glances as Preston escorted her and the children to a pew near the front. She kept her eyes forward, trying to ignore the whispers behind raised hymnals. The service was familiar and comforting, the same hymns she'd sung in Kansas, the same scripture readings. The preacher, Reverend Walsh, delivered a sermon on perseverance through hardship that resonated deeply with her. The Lord tests the righteous, he intoned, but the wicked and the one who loves violence his soul hates. After the service, Preston introduced Abigail to several neighboring ranchers and their wives. Most were polite if reserved, but one woman, Louisa Hendricks, wife of the banker, made no attempt to hide her assessment of Abigail's worn dress and the children's patched clothes. How interesting that Mr. Blackwood has hired a housekeeper with such young children, she remarked, her smile not reaching her eyes. One would think they'd be underfoot. My children are well behaved and helpful, Abigail replied evenly. I'm sure they are, dear. Mrs. Hendricks patted Abigail's arm condescendingly. It's just that the double P is such an important property. Mr. Blackwood needs proper management of his household. Preston appeared at Abigail's elbow before she could respond. Mrs. Hendricks, I see your husband is looking for you. When the banker's wife had moved away, Preston leaned close to Abigail. Don't mind Louisa. She's been trying to marry me off to her niece for 3 years. I'm sure she only has your best interests at heart, Abigail said diplomatically, though her cheeks burned with indignation. She has her own interests at heart, Preston replied dryly. Come, let's collect the children. I promised Thomas we'd look at the foals this afternoon. True to his word, Preston spent the afternoon showing Thomas the spring foals, explaining bloodlines and training with the seriousness he might have shown an adult. Emma insisted on joining them, and Abigail watched from the paddock fence as Preston lifted her daughter onto his shoulders for a better view. He's good with them, Miguel observed, coming to stand beside Abigail. Yes, he is, she agreed, surprised by the foreman's presence. The boss, he doesn't talk much about himself, but he wanted children. Many children. Miguel's dark eyes were kind. When his wife died, something in him went quiet. Until now, Abigail didn't know how to respond to this unexpected confidence. I'm just his housekeeper, Mr. Sanchez. The foreman's mustache twitched. Of course, Senora. And I am just a cowboy. Before she could question his meaning, Preston was approaching with Emma still on his shoulders and Thomas trotting alongside, peppering him with questions about horse training. Miguel, Preston nodded to his foreman. Something wrong with the herd? No, boss. Just admiring your way with children. The Mexican's eyes twinkled as he tipped his hat to Abigail and walked away. That evening, after the children were asleep, Abigail sat on the porch, enjoying the cool night air. The vast Wyoming sky spread above her, stars so bright and numerous they seemed close enough to touch. Crickets chirped in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The creak of the door announced Preston's arrival. He carried 2 cups of coffee, offering one to Abigail before settling into the chair beside her. Thank you for today, she said, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. The children had a wonderful time. So did I. Preston stretched his long legs out before him. Thomas has a good eye for horseflesh. He noticed the chestnut filly's stronger quarters right away. His father loved horses, Abigail said softly. John always said Thomas had the touch. Preston was silent for a moment. Will you tell me about him? Your husband. The question surprised her, but somehow in the darkness, it felt easier to speak of John. He was a dreamer, always sure the next season would bring better crops. The next year would be the one we got ahead. He was kind and gentle, wonderful with the children. She paused, sipping her coffee. Not very practical, though. I didn't realize how deeply in debt we were until after he died. That must have been difficult. It was a shock, Abigail admitted. I trusted him to handle our affairs. I should have asked more questions, been more involved. You trusted your husband. There's no shame in that. Perhaps, but I've learned my lesson. I'll never again be so unprepared. Preston turned to look at her, his face half-shadowed in the porch lamplight. Is that why you're determined to do everything yourself? Why you resist accepting help? Abigail felt a flare of defensiveness. I accept fair wages for honest work, Mr. Blackwood. That's not the same as charity. Preston, he corrected automatically. Then, more gently, not all help is charity, Abigail. Sometimes it's just human kindness. She looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation and the warmth in his voice when he said her name. It's getting late. I should check on the children. Preston nodded, not pressing further. Good night, then. As Abigail reached the door, he spoke again. Abigail? I'm glad you came to the Double P. She paused, her hand on the latch. So am I, she admitted softly, and slipped inside before he could see the color rising in her cheeks. The following week brought the first real test of Abigail's position at the Double P. The spring cattle drive was approaching, and the ranch hummed with preparation. Extra hands were hired, supplies were stockpiled, and the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Preston spent long days in the saddle, returning late and leaving before dawn. Abigail hardly saw him except at meals, where he was often distracted, discussing routes and grazing lands with Miguel. Then came the night of the storm. Spring storms in Wyoming could be violent, and this one hit with particular fury. Thunder rolled across the prairie, lightning split the sky, and rain lashed against the windows with a force that made the glass rattle in its frames. Emma woke screaming from a nightmare, and Thomas crept into his sister's bed to comfort her. Abigail sat with them, telling stories to distract them from the thunder, until they finally drifted back to sleep. Restless, she made her way to the kitchen to heat some milk. To her surprise, Preston sat at the table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey before him, staring into a glass as if it held answers to questions she couldn't hear. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked quietly. He looked up, and she was struck by the naked pain in his eyes before he masked it. Never could sleep through storms. Something in his voice told her there was more to the story. She heated milk for two, added a touch of honey, and set a mug before him, gently removing the whiskey glass from his hand. "Try this instead." He looked surprised but took a sip. "My mother used to make this when I was a boy." "Mine too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Finally, Preston spoke, his voice low. "My wife died during a storm like this. Sarah was 7 months along. The baby was coming too early. I rode for the doctor, but the creek was flooding. Had to find another way around. By the time I got back with him..." He trailed off, his knuckles white around the mug. "I'm so sorry," Abigail whispered. 6 years ago today." Understanding dawned. "That's why you couldn't sleep." He nodded, not meeting her eyes. "Every year I tell myself it will be easier. It never is." Without thinking, Abigail reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "Grief doesn't follow a schedule. It comes and goes like weather." Preston turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. "How did you bear it? Losing John with 2 small children depending on you." "1 day at a time," she answered honestly. "Some days 1 hour at a time. The children needed me, so I had to keep going." "You're a strong woman, Abigail Mercer." "Not strong, just stubborn." She attempted a smile. Preston's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "I've noticed." The moment stretched between them, intimate and fragile. Abigail became acutely aware of their joined hands, of the late hour, of the fact that they were alone in the lamplit kitchen while the rest of the house slept. Propriety demanded she withdraw, but something stronger held her in place. A particularly violent thunderclap broke the spell. Abigail pulled her hand away, rising quickly. "I should check on the children." Preston stood as well. "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "Thank you for the milk and the company." "You're welcome," she replied, not quite meeting his eyes, and hurried back to her quarters, her hand still tingling where he had touched it. The next morning, Preston was gone before breakfast, having ridden out with the first light to check on cattle scattered by the storm. He returned 3 days later with the other men, all of them mud-splattered and exhausted. 50 head lost to a flash flood. But it could have been worse. Abigail had hot food waiting and bathwater heating. The grateful cowboys devoured her stew and biscuits, then staggered off to the bunkhouse. Preston lingered in the kitchen after the others had gone, watching as Abigail wiped down the table. "That was the best meal I've ever tasted," he said sincerely. "You'd say that about anything after 3 days of trail food," she replied, but she was pleased nonetheless. "Where are the children?" "Asleep. They tried to wait up for you, but it got too late." Preston nodded, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. "I brought something for them, for Emma." He reached into his pocket and produced a small wooden horse, beautifully carved. Made it while we were waiting out the last of the rain yesterday. Abigail took the carving, touched by the craftsmanship and the thoughtfulness of the gift. She'll treasure it. There's one for Thomas too, but it needs more work. He ran a hand through his damp hair, looking suddenly uncertain. Abigail, about the other night. You don't need to explain, she interrupted quickly. You were grieving, and I was simply offering comfort as any friend would. Is that what we are? Friends. His blue eyes held hers steadily. Abigail felt her heart quicken. I work for you, Mr. Blackwood. Preston, he corrected automatically. Preston, she amended. I'm your housekeeper. You're more than that, he said quietly. To the children, to the men, to me. Before she could respond, he continued, the cattle drive starts next week. I'll be gone for at least a month, maybe longer. I know. Miguel explained the routine. Will you still be here when I return? The question caught her off guard. Where else would I go? Preston shrugged, an uncharacteristically awkward gesture for him. You're a capable woman. You might find better opportunities in town. Or another ranch. Understanding dawned on Abigail. Are you asking if I'm planning to leave? Yes. I'm not, she said simply. Unless you're dissatisfied with my work? Far from it. His relief was visible. Good. That's good. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, Preston straightened. I should let you get some rest. Morning comes early. Yes, it does. Abigail agreed, suddenly aware of how tired she was, how disheveled she must look after a long day of cooking and cleaning. At the doorway, Preston paused. Abigail? Thank you for making this place feel like a home again. Before she could formulate a response, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway toward his room. The days leading up to the cattle drive were a flurry of activity. Abigail barely saw Preston except at mealtimes, where he was usually deep in conversation with Miguel about the drive preparations. She told herself the tightness in her chest was simply anxiety about managing the ranch house while most of the men were away, not disappointment at his sudden distance. The morning of departure arrived with a brilliant sunrise. The cattle lowed in the holding pens, cowboys shouted to one another, and horses pranced with excitement. Abigail stood on the porch with the children, watching the organized chaos. Preston approached on horseback, his tall frame straight in the saddle. He'd be leading the drive personally, as he did every year. Reining in before the porch, he tipped his hat to Abigail. Mrs. Mercer. Children. The formality stung, but Abigail matched his tone. Mr. Blackwood. Safe journey. Thomas stepped forward. Sir, will you bring me a rock from the mountains? Preston's serious expression softened. I surely will, Thomas. And what about you, Miss Emma? What would you like from the mountains? Emma considered the question gravely. A story. A true one about something you see. A story it is, then. Preston's eyes moved to Abigail. And for you, Mrs. Mercer? Just your safe return, she answered honestly. All of you. Something flickered in his blue eyes. You'll have it. He hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag and produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. For you. Open it after we've gone. Before she could respond, he wheeled his horse around and rejoined the men. Within minutes, the entire outfit was moving out, cattle bawling, cowboys whistling and calling, dust rising in a great cloud that obscured the procession as it moved toward the distant mountains. When they had disappeared from sight, Abigail opened the package with trembling fingers. Inside was a small leather-bound book of poetry Tennyson and a folded note. For the quiet evenings, it read in a strong masculine hand. Remember, you are more than a housekeeper to this place. To me. P. Abigail pressed the book to her chest, her heart racing with emotions she wasn't ready to name. The first week without Preston and most of the hands was an adjustment. The ranch seemed eerily quiet with only Hank, Jasper, and young Charlie remaining to tend the home place. Abigail established a new routine: simpler meals, less cleaning, more time with the children. Thomas spent hours with Hank, learning to ride the gentle mare Preston had designated for his use. Emma helped Abigail in the garden they'd started behind the house, planting seeds Preston had ordered from back east. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, Abigail would sit on the porch with Tennyson, reading by lamplight until the words blurred before her eyes. Sometimes she caught herself listening for hoofbeats, though she knew it would be weeks before the drive returned. The second week brought unexpected visitors. Abigail was kneading bread dough when she heard horses in the yard. Looking out the window, she saw two well-dressed women dismounting from a carriage driven by the Pine Ridge livery stable owner. Wiping flour from her hands, she went to the door. One of the women she recognized as Louisa Hendricks, the banker's wife. The other was younger, perhaps 25, expensively dressed and quite beautiful. "Mrs. Hendricks," Abigail greeted them. "This is a surprise." "Mrs. Mercer," Louisa nodded coolly. "We were passing by and thought we'd call. This is my niece, Miss Caroline Barnes, recently arrived from St. Louis." "How do you do?" the young woman said, her voice cultured and pleasant. "Aunt Louisa has told me so much about the Double P Ranch." Abigail invited them in, acutely aware of her flour-dusted apron and practical cotton dress as she ushered them to the parlor. She served tea and the cookies Emma had helped bake that morning, while making polite conversation about the weather and local news. "Mr. Blackwood is away on the cattle drive, I understand," Louisa said, setting down her teacup. "Yes, they left nearly 2 weeks ago. They'll be gone for some time yet." "Such a shame we missed him," Caroline remarked. "I was so looking forward to meeting the man Aunt Louisa speaks of so highly." "Perhaps you'll stay in Pine Ridge long enough for his return?" Abigail suggested, though something in her rebelled at the thought. "Oh, I plan to," Caroline smiled. "Aunt Louisa has kindly invited me to stay indefinitely. I find I quite like the West, though it's certainly different from St. Louis." Caroline was the belle of St. Louis society, Louisa added proudly. "She had countless suitors, but she's always been particular." Abigail nodded politely, understanding now the purpose of this visit. Louisa was introducing her niece to the Double P, preparing the ground for a campaign to capture Preston's interest upon his return. "The house is lovely," Caroline observed, glancing around. "You've done well with it, Mrs. Mercer. Mr. Blackwood must be pleased to have such a capable housekeeper." The words were perfectly polite, yet Abigail detected a subtle emphasis on housekeeper that stung more than it should have. "Mr. Blackwood is a fair employer," she replied evenly. "My children and I are grateful for his kindness." "Yes, Aunt Louisa mentioned your situation." Caroline's sympathetic look felt patronizing. "How difficult it must be, raising children alone while working. But then, necessity forces difficult choices, doesn't it?" Before Abigail could respond, Thomas burst into the room, his face alight with excitement. "Ma, Hank says I can help him with the new calf." He stopped short at the sight of the visitors. "Sorry, Ma. Didn't know you had company." "It's all right, Thomas," Abigail said warmly. "This is Mrs. Hendricks from town, and her niece, Miss Barnes. Ladies, my son, Thomas Mercer." The boy made a creditable bow, remembering his manners despite his excitement. "Pleased to meet you, madam." "Madams. What a handsome young man," Caroline remarked, "and so well-spoken for a child raised in such circumstances." Abigail felt her temper rise at the implied slight, but before she could speak, Emma appeared in the doorway, clutching the wooden horse Preston had carved. "Thomas, Mr. Hank says to hurry." She stopped, suddenly shy at the sight of strangers. "And this must be your daughter," Louisa said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Come here, child." Emma approached cautiously, pressing against Abigail's side. "What a pretty toy," Caroline observed, noticing the wooden horse. "Where did you get it, dear?" "Mr. Preston made it for me," Emma said proudly. "He carved it special." Caroline's perfectly arched eyebrows rose slightly. "Did he indeed?" "Yes, madam. He's teaching my brother to ride, too. He says I can learn when I'm bigger." Louisa and Caroline exchanged a look that made Abigail's cheeks burn. "Children," she said firmly, "Mrs. Hendricks and Miss Barnes won't be staying much longer. Thomas, you may go help Hank. Emma, please put your horse away safely, and then you may watch from the fence if Hank says it's all right." After the children had gone, an awkward silence fell. Finally, Louisa set down her teacup with a decisive click. "Well, we should be going. Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Mercer." At the door, Caroline turned to Abigail with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It was lovely meeting you. I do hope we'll see more of each other when Mr. Blackwood returns." After they had gone, Abigail stood on the porch, watching the carriage disappear down the long drive. Caroline Barnes was everything she was not: wealthy, educated, refined, and available for marriage. The kind of woman a successful rancher might choose as a wife. The thought sent an unexpected pang through her heart. She had no claim on Preston Blackwood beyond employment. His kindness to her children, his moments of personal warmth, these could simply be the actions of a decent man toward a widow in difficult circumstances. That evening, she couldn't concentrate on Tennyson. Instead, she sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, wondering where Preston was tonight, if he was looking at the same stars from some mountain campsite, and whether he ever thought of her as anything more than his housekeeper. The weeks passed with agonizing slowness. May turned to June, bringing longer days and hotter temperatures. The garden flourished under Abigail and Emma's care, producing the first tender vegetables. Thomas graduated from riding in the corral to accompanying Hank on short rides around the home pastures. One evening in late June, as Abigail sat mending on the porch, Hank approached, hat in hand. "Mrs. Mercer, got a telegram from the boss today." Abigail's heart leapt. "Is everything all right?" "Yes'm. Drive's going well. They're on their way back. Should be here in about a week, weather permitting." "That's wonderful news." She tried to keep her voice steady, though her pulse had quickened at the thought of Preston's return. Hank nodded, twisting his hat brim. "There's something else. Boss asked me to take you and the young uns into town tomorrow. Said the dressmaker should have your things ready, and he wants you to pick up some supplies for a proper welcome home dinner." The next day found Abigail and the children in Pine Ridge, collecting packages from Mrs. Lewis and supplies from the general store. The dressmaker had outdone herself: 3 new dresses for Abigail, all beautifully made, and new clothes for the children as well. Mr. Blackwood was most specific about the blue fabric, Mrs. Lewis commented as Abigail admired the finest of the dresses. "Said it should match your eyes exactly." Abigail flushed, remembering Preston's comment in the store months ago. "He has a good eye for color," she said non-committally. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Abigail became aware of whispers and stares from townsfolk passing by. One woman openly nudged her companion, both looking at Abigail with undisguised curiosity. "Is there something on my face?" she asked Hank quietly. The old cowboy looked uncomfortable. "It ain't that, madam. It's just, well, there's been talk." "What kind of talk?" Hank scratched his grizzled chin. "About you and the boss. Folks wondering if he's sweet on you, what with him setting you up so nice at the ranch and all." Abigail felt her face flame. "That's ridiculous." Mr. Blackwood is my employer. He's been kind to me and my children because he's a decent man, not because he's sweet on me. Yes'm, Hank agreed too quickly. That's what I tell him too. But his eyes told a different story, and Abigail found herself wondering if there might be some truth to the gossip after all. The day of Preston's expected return, Abigail was up before dawn. She baked bread and pies, prepared a roast, and cleaned the already spotless house. In the afternoon, she bathed the children and dressed them in their new clothes, then took extra care with her own appearance. Standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, she hardly recognized herself in the blue dress that did indeed match her eyes. The fine cotton draped gracefully over her figure, making her look younger and prettier than she had in years. Her dark hair, usually pinned severely back, she arranged in a softer style, with a few curls framing her face. "You look like a princess, Mama," Emma said from the doorway. Abigail smiled, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. "Thank you, darling. Now let's make sure everything is ready for Mr. Blackwood and the men." The sun was setting when they heard the distant sound of cattle and horses approaching. Abigail and the children waited on the porch, straining their eyes in the fading light. Slowly, the procession came into view, cattle first, dusty and tired, then the cowboys, equally dusty but laughing and calling to one another. And finally, riding tall at the rear, Preston Blackwood. He spotted them on the porch and raised his hand in greeting. Even at a distance, Abigail could see the smile that transformed his trail-worn face. The next hours were a blur of activity. The cattle were herded into holding pens, horses were unsaddled and turned out to pasture, and the exhausted cowboys straggled into the house, drawn by the smell of hot food and the promise of comfortable chairs. Preston was among the last to enter, having ensured that every man and animal was properly settled. He paused in the doorway, hat in hand, his eyes finding Abigail immediately. "Welcome home," she said softly. His gaze traveled over her, taking in the blue dress, the loosened hair, the color in her cheeks. "It's good to be home," he replied, his voice equally soft. Thomas broke the moment, running to Preston with excitement. "Mr. Blackwood, did you bring me a rock from the mountains?" Preston laughed, reaching into his pocket to produce a smooth, striped stone. "Picked it from a creek bed myself. That's tigers, I suppose, to bring strength and good luck." While Thomas examined his treasure, Emma tugged at Preston's sleeve. "What about my story?" "A true one, you promised." "So I did, Miss Emma." Preston scooped the little girl up, settling her on his hip as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "And I have a wonderful story about a mama bear and her cubs that I saw near the high pasture. But first, I believe I need to wash the trail dust off before I ruin your mama's clean house." The evening was filled with laughter and stories as the men recounted adventures from the drive. Preston sat at the head of the table, occasionally catching Abigail's eye as she served food and refilled coffee cups. Each glance sent warmth spreading through her, though she told herself it was merely the heat from the kitchen. Later, after the men had retired to the bunkhouse and the children were asleep, Abigail returned to the kitchen to finish cleaning up. She found Preston there, freshly bathed and changed, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might join me on the porch," he said, offering her a cup. "It's a beautiful night." They sat side by side in the porch chairs, the familiar arrangement feeling somehow different now. Stars blazed overhead, and night insects hummed in the darkness. "The drive was successful?" Abigail asked. "Very. Got good prices in Cheyenne. The Double P will have its best year yet." Preston took a sip of his coffee. "But I'm more interested in what happened here while I was gone." "Nothing very exciting. The garden is doing well. Thomas is becoming quite the horseman. Emma has learned to make biscuits almost as good as mine." "And you?" "Me?" Abigail was surprised by the question. I've been keeping house as always. You look different, Preston observed. The dress suits you, but it's more than that. Abigail felt herself blush, grateful for the darkness. Wyoming agrees with me, I suppose. Wyoming is lucky to have you. He paused, then asked casually, Did you have any visitors while I was away? She hesitated, then decided on honesty. Mrs. Hendricks called, with her niece from St. Louis. Miss Barnes. Ah! Preston's voice held a note of amusement. Louisa wastes no time. What did you think of the famous niece? She seemed very accomplished, beautiful certainly, and perfect for a rough rancher in need of refinement. There was a definite smile in his voice now. I wouldn't presume to judge what's perfect for you, Mr. Blackwood. Preston, he corrected, leaning forward in his chair. Abigail, after all these months, will you never remember to call me Preston? It doesn't seem proper, given our positions. And what positions would those be? Employer and employee, she replied, though the words felt inadequate for what had grown between them. Preston was silent for a long moment. Then he set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. What if I wanted to change that arrangement? Abigail's heart skipped. I don't understand. I think you do. His voice was gentle but serious. Abigail, these past months with you and the children here have been the happiest I've known in years. This house is a home again. There's laughter and warmth and life. I'm glad we've been able to make things more comfortable for you, she said carefully. It's more than comfort. Preston reached out, taking her hand in his. Every day on the drive, I found myself thinking of you, wondering what you were doing, if you were thinking of me too, missing your voice, your smile. Abigail's throat tightened with emotion. Preston, I know it hasn't been long since you lost John. I know you came here looking for work, not entanglements, but I can't help how I feel. His fingers tightened around hers. I'm falling in love with you, Abigail Mercer, with your strength, your kindness, your devotion to your children. Tears pricked Abigail's eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything now. I'm not asking for promises. He released her hand gently. Just think about it. About whether you could ever see me as more than your employer. Abigail looked at him in the starlight, this good, honorable man who had opened his home and his heart to her family when they had nothing. I already do, she admitted softly. Preston's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying that I care for you too, more than I should, more than I was prepared for. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. Then we have somewhere to begin. They talked for hours that night, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Preston spoke of his childhood on the ranch, of his brief, happy marriage to Sarah, of the loneliness that had followed her death. Abigail told him about meeting John at a church social back in Illinois, about their struggle to make the Kansas farm profitable, about the desperate months after his death. I swore I'd never depend on anyone again, she confessed, that I'd make my own way no matter what. Independence is admirable, Preston said, but there's strength in letting someone walk beside you too, not to carry you, but to share the journey. As the night deepened around them, Preston finally stood. It's late. We should both get some rest. At her door he paused. May I call on you properly? Court you as you deserve. Abigail smiled, touched by his old-fashioned formality. Yes, you may. Good. He hesitated, then bent and brushed his lips against her cheek. A touch so gentle it might have been the wing of a butterfly. Good night, Abigail. Good night, Preston, she whispered, and for once, his name came naturally to her lips. The next weeks brought a subtle but significant shift in life at the Double P. Preston began taking Sunday meals with Abigail and the children in their quarters rather than in the main dining room. He found reasons to include Thomas in ranch activities, teaching the boy to rope and brand alongside the regular hands. He brought small gifts from his trips to town: ribbons for Emma's hair, a book of adventure stories for Thomas, wildflowers for Abigail. The ranch hands noticed the changes, exchanging knowing glances when Preston lingered in the kitchen after meals, or when Abigail blushed at something he whispered to her. Miguel, in particular, seemed pleased by the development, nodding approvingly when he caught them walking together in the evenings. "The boss, he smiles more now," the foreman commented to Abigail one afternoon as she hung laundry. "It is good to see." Not everyone was so supportive, however. Word of Preston's interest in his housekeeper had spread to town, and Abigail felt the curious stares and whispers whenever she visited Pine Ridge. Louisa Hendricks made a point of snubbing her in the general store, turning ostentatiously away when Abigail greeted her. "Don't mind her, Mr. Jenkins advised, wrapping Abigail's purchases. "She's just sore because her niece isn't making any headway with Mr. Blackwood." "I don't know what you mean," Abigail demurred, though her cheeks warmed. The storekeeper winked. "Course you don't, Mrs. Mercer. But I will say this: I've known Preston Blackwood since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, and I've never seen him look at any woman the way he looks at you. Not even his first wife, God rest her soul." July brought scorching heat and the annual Pine Ridge Independence Day celebration. The whole town and surrounding ranches gathered for a day of races, contests, food, and dancing. It would be Abigail and the children's first real social event since arriving in Wyoming. "Do we have to go?" Thomas asked the night before, unusually subdued. "Don't you want to see the horse races?" Abigail asked, surprised. "Preston says there will be shooting contests and pie-eating competitions too." The boy shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "I guess. What's troubling you, son?" Thomas fidgeted with his bedspread. "Jimmy Wilson said his pa says Mr. Blackwood only keeps us around because he's sweet on you. That we'd be in the poorhouse otherwise." Abigail's heart sank. Jimmy Wilson was the son of one of the hands, a boy slightly older than Thomas who sometimes played with him when his father visited the ranch. "Thomas, look at me," she said gently. "Mr. Blackwood hired me because I'm a good housekeeper. We earn our keep here. You understand that, don't you?" The boy nodded reluctantly. "And yes, Mr. Blackwood and I have become friends, good friends. He cares about all of us. But that doesn't mean we don't belong here on our own merits. So we're not charity cases?" "Absolutely not." Abigail hugged him fiercely. "We are Mercers. We work hard and stand on our own 2 feet. Like Pa always said." Exactly like Pa always said. The 4th of July dawned clear and hot. Preston arrived at their quarters early, carrying packages. "What's this?" Abigail asked as he set them on the table. "Just something for the celebration." He looked uncharacteristically nervous. "Open them." Inside the first box was a beautiful cream-colored dress with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. The second contained a miniature version for Emma, and the third held a boy's suit in a matching shade. "Preston, they're beautiful, but before you protest," he interrupted, "these aren't gifts. They're costumes." "Costumes?" He grinned. "The town council asked me to play the role of town founder in the pageant this year. These are for my family." His voice softened on the last word, eyes intent on her face. "Will you stand with me, Abigail? You and the children?" The question held more weight than the simple request to participate in a pageant, and they both knew it. This would be a public declaration of his intentions toward her. "Are you certain?" she asked quietly. "People will talk. Let them." Preston took her hand, his gaze steady. "I'm proud to have you by my side. All of you." The Pine Ridge Independence Day celebration was in full swing when they arrived. Bunting decorated the main street, tables groaned with food, and a makeshift stage had been erected in the town square. Children ran laughing between the booths, and the air smelled of barbecue and sweet treats. As Preston helped Abigail and the children down from the wagon, she was acutely aware of the attention they drew. The matching outfits made their connection unmistakable, and Preston's hand at the small of her back, as he guided her through the crowd, was a clear statement of his regard. Louisa Hendricks stood with a group of town matrons near the refreshment table, her expression souring as she spotted them. Beside her, Caroline Barnes looked elegant in a fashionable dress that must have come from St. Louis, her pretty face composed but her eyes sharp as they followed Preston's attentive gestures toward Abigail. "Mrs. Mercer." Louisa nodded stiffly when social necessity forced an acknowledgement. "What a charming ensemble." "Thank you," Abigail replied evenly. "Mr. Blackwood was kind enough to provide costumes for the pageant." "How thoughtful." Caroline's voice was honey over steel. "Mr. Blackwood, you must be the most generous employer in the territory." Preston's arm slipped around Abigail's waist, a gesture too intimate to be mistaken. "Miss Barnes, I find that generosity comes naturally when the recipient is so deserving." The pageant itself was a simple affair, a retelling of Pine Ridge's founding 30 years earlier, with Preston playing his own father, who had been among the first settlers. Abigail, cast as his wife, had only to stand beside him looking supportive while he delivered a short speech about the promise of the West. Watching him on the small stage, confident and at ease before his neighbors, Abigail felt a surge of pride and affection. This good man had chosen her, despite the gossip and raised eyebrows. Her, with her second-hand dresses and 2 fatherless children and no dowry but her own 2 hands. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activities. Thomas entered the boys' sack race, coming in third and beaming with pride as Preston cheered him on. Emma helped judge the pie contest, her serious expression as she tasted each entry drawing laughter and applause. As evening fell, lanterns were lit, and musicians set up for dancing. Preston found Abigail watching Thomas attempt to lasso a practice dummy under Miguel's instruction. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Mercer?" he asked formally, extending his hand. The musicians were playing a waltz, and as Preston led her onto the makeshift dance floor, Abigail was grateful for the dancing lessons of her youth. His hand was warm and strong at her waist, guiding her through the steps with surprising grace for such a tall man. "You dance well," she observed, relaxing into his lead. "My mother insisted," he replied with a smile. "Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a bull in a china shop. She was a wise woman. She would have liked you." Preston's eyes held hers as they turned. "She always said I needed someone with sense to balance my stubborn streak." Abigail laughed. "And do I balance you, Mr. Blackwood? In every way that matters." His voice grew serious. "You've brought light back to my life, Abigail. Hope, joy." The music swelled around them, but Abigail barely heard it, lost in the intensity of his gaze. "Preston, I know it's soon," he said quietly. "I know you've had to be strong for so long, but I want to be the one you can lean on when you're tired. The one who stands beside you, not above you or behind you." Abigail's heart hammered in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you." The words were simple, direct, like the man himself. "I love your strength and your gentleness. I love the way you've raised those children to be honest and brave. I love that you came to my door that day, proud and determined, asking not for charity but for work." Tears pricked Abigail's eyes, but she blinked them back, aware of the curious glances from those around them. "Preston, people are watching. Let them watch," he murmured, drawing her incrementally closer. Let them see that the luckiest man in Wyoming is dancing with the woman he hopes to marry. The word marry sent a shock through Abigail. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. Preston's hand tightened on hers. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but when you're ready. When you can believe that I love you for yourself, not out of pity or loneliness or convenience. The music ended, and they stood still while couples around them moved off the floor. Abigail was aware of whispers, of Louisa Hendricks's scandalized expression, of Caroline Barnes's tight smile. I need time, she whispered. You have it, Preston assured her. All the time you need. Later, as they drove home under a sky blazing with stars, the children sleeping in the back of the wagon, Abigail finally found the courage to speak the truth in her heart. I love you too, she said softly. I think I have since that first night in the kitchen, when you trusted me with your grief. Preston's intake of breath was audible. He reined the horses to a stop, turning to face her in the starlight. Abigail, I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid of depending on someone again, of what would happen to the children if I made another mistake. Afraid that your kindness was just that kindness and not what I hoped it might be. And now, his voice was husky with emotion. Now I'm still afraid, she said honestly. But I'm more afraid of not taking this chance, of letting fear keep me from happiness. Preston lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers up her arm. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking that chance. They didn't speak again until they reached the ranch, but their silence was filled with new understanding, with promises as yet unspoken but deeply felt. August brought the hottest days of summer, with heat that shimmered over the pastures and sent cattle seeking shade by mid-morning. The children spent mornings helping with chores and afternoons wading in the creek that ran behind the ranch house, under the watchful eye of whoever was available, usually Hank or Jasper, occasionally Preston himself when ranch business allowed. Preston had been true to his word, not pressing Abigail for commitments but courting her with a patient devotion that touched her deeply. They established a routine of evening walks after supper, sometimes with the children, sometimes alone while Hank or Miguel entertained Thomas and Emma with stories of the early days on the Double P. It was during one such walk, as they paused to watch the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple, that Preston broached a subject they had both been avoiding. School starts next month, he said casually. Abigail nodded. Thomas is excited. He's missed learning. Heinrich has a good teacher. Strict but fair, by all accounts. Preston hesitated. It's 3 miles to town, though. Too far for him to walk daily. I've been thinking about that, Abigail admitted. Perhaps I could take him in the buggy each morning, then pick him up after school. That would take hours out of your day. Preston looked at her sideways. There is another solution. Oh, we could move to town during the school year. I have a house there, built when my father first established the ranch. It's small but comfortable. You and the children could stay there weekdays, and I join you when I can. Weekends we'd all come back to the ranch. Abigail was surprised. You never mentioned a townhouse before. Haven't had reason to use it in years, Preston shrugged. But it's kept in good repair. Mrs. Hollister, my former housekeeper, lived there with her husband until they moved to Oregon. It's very generous of you, but I'm not sure. There's something else, Preston interrupted gently. Something I've been meaning to discuss with you. The serious tone of his voice made Abigail's heart skip. Yes. I've had a letter from my mother's sister in Boston. She's getting on in years and wants to see me. It would mean a trip east at least a month, possibly longer. When would you leave? Late September, after the fall roundup. Preston took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. I'd like you and the children to come with me. Abigail stared at him. To Boston? But that's A chance for the children to see more of the world. For you to meet what little family I have left. And he hesitated, then continued firmly, for us to be married there if you're willing. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Married? Preston dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hand. Abigail Mercer, I love you with all my heart. I love your children as if they were my own. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears filled Abigail's eyes, spilling over as she looked down at the strong, good man kneeling in the grass. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Preston's face transformed with joy. He rose, gathering her into his arms, and kissed her for the first time, a kiss full of tenderness and promise that left Abigail breathless. I don't have a ring yet, he apologized. I wanted to be sure of your answer first. I don't need a ring, Abigail assured him, her hands resting against his chest. Just your word. You have that and more. Preston kissed her again, more deeply this time. When they finally parted, both were flushed and breathing quickly. We should tell the children. The news was received with mixed reactions. Emma was delighted, immediately peppering them with questions about her dress for the wedding and whether she could have flowers in her hair. Thomas was quieter, his young face serious as he considered the implications. Will you be our pa now? He asked Preston directly. Preston knelt to the boy's level, meeting his eyes. I would be honored to be your pa, Thomas, but I know that your father will always have a special place in your heart. I don't want to replace him. I just want to be here for you, to help you grow into the fine man he would want you to be. Thomas thought about this, then nodded solemnly. I think Pa would like that. He always said a boy needs a man to show him the way. Your father was a wise man, Preston said, his voice thick with emotion. He raised a fine son. That night, after the children were asleep, Abigail and Preston sat on the porch swing, her head resting on his shoulder as they contemplated their future. We'll be married in Boston, then return here? She asked. That's my hope, unless you'd prefer to stay in the East. Abigail shook her head. No, this is home now, for all of us. I've been thinking, Preston said, his arm tightening around her. The house is large enough for an expanded family. But we might want to consider some renovations. More bedrooms, perhaps. Abigail looked up at him, catching his meaning. Are you hoping for more children? I'd like that very much. His eyes were tender in the lamplight. If you would. I would, she admitted softly. Very much. The announcement of their engagement was met with a variety of responses in Pine Ridge. Many offered sincere congratulations, particularly those who had known Preston for years and had seen the positive change in him since Abigail's arrival. Others were more reserved, clearly surprised that the territory's most eligible bachelor had chosen a penniless widow with 2 children. Louisa Hendricks made no attempt to hide her disapproval, snubbing Abigail completely when they encountered each other in town. Caroline Barnes, on the other hand, offered cool felicitations before announcing her own imminent return to St. Louis. The West is not quite what I expected, she told Abigail with a tight smile. I find I miss the amenities of city life. The weeks leading up to their departure for Boston flew by in a whirlwind of preparations. Preston insisted on ordering a complete new wardrobe for Abigail and the children, suitable for Eastern society. Miguel was appointed to oversee the ranch in Preston's absence, with Hank as his second in command. The Double P will be in good hands, Preston assured Abigail as they finalized arrangements. Miguel knows this land almost as well as I do. The journey east was an adventure in itself. The children, who had never been on a train before, pressed their faces to the windows as the landscape changed from the rugged mountains of Wyoming to the rolling plains of Nebraska, the fertile fields of Illinois, and finally the dense forests and neat towns of New England. Boston, when they arrived, was everything Abigail had imagined and more, a city of brick and stone, of culture and history so different from the raw newness of the West. Preston's aunt, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood Pierce, lived in a stately townhouse on Beacon Hill, with views of the Charles River and the Common. "So this is the young woman who has captured my nephew's heart," Mrs. Pierce said upon their introduction, her shrewd eyes taking in Abigail's simple traveling outfit and the children's wide-eyed wonder. "Welcome to Boston, my dear." Despite her initial trepidation, Abigail found herself warming to Eleanor Pierce. The elderly woman was formidable but kind, especially to Thomas and Emma, whom she immediately set about educating in Eastern customs. "Children should know their heritage," she informed Abigail, "even if they choose to live in the wilderness." Preston laughed at this description of the double P. "Aunt Eleanor still thinks I live in a sod hut surrounded by hostile Indians." "Well, don't you?" his aunt retorted. "From your letters, it sounds positively primitive." "The double P is one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory," Abigail defended. "Preston has built something remarkable there." Mrs. Pierce's eyebrows rose at her spirited response. "I see my nephew has found a woman with backbone. Good. He'll need that out in your Wyoming." The wedding was set for 3 weeks after their arrival, allowing time for Abigail's wedding dress to be made and for the children to become comfortable in their new surroundings. Eleanor insisted on hosting the ceremony in her home, inviting a small circle of family friends and the minister from her church. "Nothing ostentatious," she decreed, "but proper. A Blackwood wedding must have certain standards." On the morning of the wedding, as Abigail stood in Eleanor's guest bedroom being fitted into her gown by a fussy seamstress, a knock came at the door. "Are you decent, my dear?" Eleanor called. "I have something for you." The elderly woman entered, carrying a small velvet box. "Preston asked me to give you this." It was his mother's. Inside the box lay a delicate gold band set with a single perfect diamond. "It's beautiful," Abigail breathed. "My sister wore it for 30 years, Eleanor said, her voice softening with memory. She and Preston's father were deeply in love, despite the differences in their backgrounds. She gave up much to follow him west, but she never regretted it. "Thank you for sharing this with me," Abigail said, touched by the family history. "There's something else." Eleanor reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded document. "This is for you." "From me?" Abigail opened it curiously, then gasped as she read the contents. "Mrs. Pierce, I can't possibly accept this." "You can and you will," Eleanor said firmly. "It's a trust fund for your children Thomas and Emma, and any others who may come along. My late husband left me well provided for, and I have no children of my own. Preston is my only close relative, and now you and the children are my family too." Tears pricked Abigail's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll use it wisely. For education, for opportunities." Eleanor's aged hand covered Abigail's. "I know what it is to worry about the future, my dear. This is my gift to you, peace of mind." The wedding itself was everything Abigail could have wished for, intimate and meaningful, with Thomas standing proudly beside Preston and Emma scattering rose petals before Abigail as she walked to her groom. Preston's eyes never left her face as she approached in her ivory silk gown, his expression one of such love and pride that it brought tears to her eyes. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, and Abigail felt the rightness of this moment, this choice, this man who had offered her so much more than wages when she came to his door. Their vows were traditional but spoken with deep sincerity. When Preston slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, whispering, "With this ring, I thee wed," Abigail felt the last of her doubts and fears melt away. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Preston's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. As they turned to face their small gathering of witnesses, Abigail caught Emma's delighted grin and Thomas's solemn nod of approval. They spent 2 more weeks in Boston, allowing the children to explore the city with Eleanor, while Preston attended to business matters and Abigail prepared for their return journey. By the time they boarded the train west, Thomas and Emma had become quite attached to their new great-aunt, extracting promises of visits and letters. "You've changed my nephew," Eleanor told Abigail as they said their goodbyes at the station. "There's light in his eyes again, peace in his heart." "He's changed me too," Abigail admitted. "Taught me to trust again, to hope." "Then you're well matched indeed." The elderly woman embraced her warmly. "Go with my blessing, and know you always have a home here if you need it." The journey back to Wyoming seemed faster somehow, perhaps because they were now traveling as a family, or perhaps because Abigail was eager to begin their new life together. Preston used the long train rides to discuss plans for the ranch expansions he'd been considering, improvements to the house, the possibility of building a small schoolhouse on the property so other ranch children wouldn't have to travel to town. "You've thought of everything," Abigail marveled. "I've had years to plan," Preston admitted. "Just needed the right partner to make those plans worth pursuing." When they finally arrived back at the Double P, they found the entire ranch turned out to welcome them. Miguel and the hands standing in a row before the house, hats in hands, grins on their faces. A large banner hung from the porch, reading, "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood." "You knew about this?" Abigail accused Preston, seeing his lack of surprise. "Miguel might have mentioned something in his last telegram," he admitted with a smile. That evening, after a celebratory dinner with all the hands, Preston carried Emma to bed while Abigail tucked Thomas in. The boy was nearly asleep already, exhausted from the journey and the excitement of return. "Ma?" he murmured as she smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "Yes, darling? I'm glad we came here, to the Double P. So am I, Thomas. And I'm glad Preston's my pa now." His eyes drifted closed. "He gives more than wages. He gives love." Abigail's heart swelled with emotion. "Yes, he does. Sleep now, my brave boy." She found Preston waiting for her in the hallway, his eyes soft in the lamplight. "Everything all right?" "Perfect," she assured him, stepping into his embrace. "Thomas just reminded me of something important." "What's that?" "That what you offered me that first day was exactly what you promised more than wages. A home, family, a future." Preston's arms tightened around her. "And what you gave me was even more precious, a reason to build that future." He kissed her gently. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood." "Home?" Abigail agreed, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "At last."